Venom: The Last Dance, which is allegedly the final Venom film starring Tom Hardy, who's been portraying this character since 2018. And this movie has been in the works pretty much since the sequel came out, Venom Let There Be Carnage, back in 2021, a movie that we did review on this pod. These films have been hugely, hugely successful for Sony, who have been
Mm-hmm.
experimenting with Spider-Man spin-off films for a number of years now. But Tom Hardy, has been the mainstay for this franchise, and he stated all the way back in 2018 when he first was announced as the character and the first movie was going to be coming out that he had signed on to do 3 Venom films. Now, ultimately, it would be determined as to whether or not we would see those come to fruition based on the movie's success, and how much it would make at the box office. And boy, that first Venom movie made a lot of money in 2018, over $850 million at the box office. And so we got Venom Let There Be Carnage, another hugely successful movie. Definitely dropped off, but about a $500 million at the box office. Of course, COVID was still a big thing when that movie came out. But once Let There Be Carnage came out and they saw like, hey, there's still a big, massive audience showing up for these movies, Sony Pictures confirmed that this movie was in development officially at CinemaCon in April of 2022. And also Tom Hardy had revealed that Kelly Marcel was going to be directing and helping write the screenplay after she's previously worked on the prior Venom films in different capacities. And Andy Serkis, who directed Let There Be Carnage in 2021, he was unable to come back because he already had prior commitments to another TV show that he was working on. But as we'll talk about here, he ultimately did end up in this movie. They started filming the film back in 2023 in Spain, but then, of course, the writers and actor strike sort of put a pause on things. There were a few production delays, but they finally landed on this release date that just passed this past weekend, October 25th, 2024. But to just think about Venom in a sort of macro scope type of way, these films have a very interesting place, I think, in the conversation of comic book movies that we've gotten in the 2010s and the 2020s. They're very different. It's certainly a different take on the character than I think a lot of people are used to. But they have been very, very successful. They have just done marvels, no pun intended, for Sony in terms of financial success. So just want to start off and ask you, your relationship to the Venom films, like what does that look like? And ultimately, why do you think that they have worked so well up until this point? Why do you think that they have been so successful and have resonated with so many people across the world?
Yeah, I think, after that first Venom film comes out, it's by the end of it, you're like, okay, if sequels are a thing, I think I understand what this thing is, what this movie is supposed to be, what Venom is supposed to feel like. And quite plainly, when you just think of it as Eddie Brock talking to this alien from outer space that is within him, you're like, oh, that's what these movies are. They're like weird, almost buddy cop films, if that makes any sense. And from then, I think my expectations have been set. And in my relationship, I think with this Venom franchise is that these weird, kind of fun and funny buddy cop films that have to do with the relationship between Venom and Eddie Brock, and I think I think that to an extent, one, people just love Venom. People just love Venom. They always have. That's been the history of Venom. That is one of the most popular anti-hero slash villain, whatever you want to call him, that we have gotten. It's in pop culture everywhere. It's in Spider-Man culture everywhere. You'll see him in multiple video games where it's just crazy. Venom is just like that, and I think people were excited to see what they could look like on the big screen. And what's funny about Venom is he is tricky when it comes to what he is supposed to look like on the screen. And people seeing that first Venom was like, wait a second, this looks pretty good. Like, they got the design pretty decent. They got some of his personality things pretty decent of what the Lethal Protector is supposed to look like. And I think people were excited again to see Venom, to see how ridiculous he is as a character in that first movie. Made hella money because of it, because of all of those things. Loving Venom, loving Spider-Man, people seeing Tom Hardy. It's just, there was, I think, several factors that led to Venom and its success. But here we are now, and it's just like, man, Let There Be Carnage still makes money. People still eating it up, man. And again, I think they know what they're getting with these Venom films. They had established a tone. And we'll talk about this here, Last Dance soon, but I think Last Dance is no different as well. But man, people love Venom, dude, and people just want to see what that looks like on the big screen, and they'll continue to watch them. Symbiotes are interesting. Symbiotes are cool. And people think these movies are funny and interesting, and you can turn your brain off and have fun, and that's what this franchise is, and I think that's the expectation.
I also think it worked in Sony's benefit in making this movie. A couple of things. One, Venom comes out in 2018. We are at the absolute apex, the height of comic book film popularity. It was never a more
Mm-hmm.
popular time. I think 2018 is the greatest year for comic book movies that we've seen thus far. It was just a wave of huge success after huge success after huge success. And I think that from a business standpoint, when one movie does good, even if it's from a different studio, that's going to be a favorable outcome for all people involved. If a DC movie does good, a Marvel movie will do good, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Sony and like, I think all of these things were speaking to each other, and I think at that time there was also still potentially an expectation and a question, like, hey, well, we got a Venom standalone movie, but that's going to cross
Mm-hmm.
over with Spider-Man at some point, right? Right, like he's gonna have that big fight, right? Like, I think we were all still thinking that was a
Mm-hmm.
possibility. Clearly that's not the case anymore, but it seemed like it could happen in 2018, and so that general enthusiasm and excitement was just palpable, and it was there
Yeah.
because it's like, let's see what they do with this Venom, because yeah, he's going to meet up with Tom Holland and Spider-Man at some point, and they're going to fight and have a big massive battle, and it's going to be the greatest comic book throwdown that we've seen in live action. I think just the possibilities and the hopeful aspirations of what Venom could be, even beyond the first film, it was just at an all-time high, because it felt
Mm-hmm.
like that anything was possible at that particular time. And so I think just curiosity was huge as well, in addition
Yeah.
to them striking a pretty good tone, and Tom Hardy really committing to the bit and to the character, and people enjoying and loving his performance, and finding a lot of endearing qualities about that. And then 2021 comes out. This was again, COVID, and the movie theater sort of experience was very much in question, and people weren't showing up to movies until like Venom Let There Be Carnage comes out, and it's just a good time. It's short. It's like 90 minutes long. People
Mm-hmm.
were just like, yeah, let's just go. It's not going to require us to see 12 other movies. We can just show up and
Mm-hmm.
enjoy it, and that's really what it is. It's just like a turn your brain off, campy, over the top comic book movie with weird performances from pretty well-known actors. And so it worked in their favor again. And I definitely don't want to lose sight of the fact that Sony did continue to leverage the relationship with Spider-Man and what was happening in those other films. Like that movie in 2021 comes out right before Spider-Man No Way Home. So we all
Mm-hmm.
thought like, oh, there might be some tie-ins here, which there kind of were. So I certainly think that the Spider-Man of it all, even though he wasn't in these movies, certainly helped and aided the fact that in why this was such a huge success for that studio. But
Yeah.
ultimately, Venom, now concluding with this third film, it's gonna pretty much close the door on Tom Hardy's interpretation of the character. And I think it's interesting, considering that those films were super successful. There was, I think, an expectation that this movie would come in and maybe perform similarly, and there were a lot of curious ears and eyes in terms of what Venom: The Last Dance would do, and how it may even also set up things down the line. But the movie did come out, and we have some official box office numbers, and I just want to kind of run through these quickly, because they are probably not what people expected. Because tracking from a week ago had the film initially pacing to make between 70 and 80 million dollars in its opening domestic weekend. Well, it didn't hit that. Turns out the movie made $51 million domestically. Now, when you hear that number, that's a lot of money. For most
Yeesh.
movies, that's an incredible opening weekend, but comparatively to the rest of the Venom franchise, not
Mm-hmm.
that great. It's the lowest domestic opening of the trilogy thus far. Venom Let There Be Carnage in 2021 opened to $90 million, and even the original Venom opened to $80 million in 2018. So the first film to the second film, we saw a bump, we saw an increase. And so naturally, you would expect something on par, or maybe even an increase with the third film. But this is a significant drop off, almost $40 million of a drop off, worth of a drop off between the second film and the third film. Now, internationally, it's a bit of a different story, because this kind of overperformed in foreign territories, it actually pulled in
Mhm.
$124 million. Those ticket sales rank as the third largest Hollywood opening of 2024, only behind Disney's Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine. And so it brings its worldwide total to $175 million. And so it's a bit of a yin and yang. Overseas, it did well. I think it exceeded expectations. Don't know how far that's going to carry and go, but here domestically, it's a bad story. I don't know if you can really paint it any other way. Deadline calculates that the movie needs to make between $450 and $500 million in order to turn a profit, because the movie
Mm.
has been budgeted at about $120 million. Rotten Tomatoes, 37% critic score. No surprise, that's kind of on pace with the other movies. But an 80% audience score, relatively good. Although the cinema score is the lowest of the trilogy thus far, sitting at a B minus. So it's interesting outlook. But what do you make of these numbers? Again, this domestically is a big drop off. I think that this just shows that the interest level and the excitement for this third movie was nowhere near the level or to the degree in which we saw the first and the second film. What do you attribute to that, and ultimately, how bad of an outlook is this for this particular film after the opening weekend?
Man, whew, it's such an interesting story. These Venom movies, man. One thing I will say, outside of Deadpool and Wolverine, we've talked at lengths about just how comic book movies have been doing in the box office in general. A lot of people haven't been interested, per se, in these movies. Not only that, but Let There Be Carnage had Woody Harrelson playing Carnage. I think that helps that movie do some crazy things. I'm gonna lie to you. But there's still a trend here of some of these comic book films just not performing, especially a lot of these threequels haven't been Thor Love and Thunder, and another threequel, Ant-Man in the Quantum Mania. Like, there just hasn't been good turnout for a lot of these films, and I think Venom is no exception here, where we live in a time. You even just had another good point before this, where you're like, Spider-Man helped the performance of that first. We haven't seen Spider-Man in a very long time, so a lot of people aren't thinking, I need to go see this Venom film either. Well, Spider-Man's not going to be in it. And Woody Harrelson's not playing Carnage. So what am I seeing? All the trailer really gives you was Venom as a horse. You know what I'm saying? Which is why I also think there is something where, like, they didn't decide to put Noel in the trailer until, what, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and that doesn't help because a lot of people don't even know who Noel really is. He's a new character. Noel came out in like 2018. So all of that being said, like, a lot of the marketing, a lot of the energy around superhero films, like, I think a lot of that attributes to what this did domestically. It's hard to be excited for something that is not going to have Spider-Man in it, in all those other reasons, especially when it's like, you say one comic book movie leads to the downfall of another comic book movie. We just talked about Joker. I get it. But we just talked about Joker. But Joker was on digital in like 2 weeks. You know what I'm saying? There's another thing here where people might be like, y'all want me to pay money to go see that when I could probably wait on this movie for 2 weeks to come out on digital in 2 weeks? I'm not doing that. And I think some people really do follow that model. So I think all of that being said, I think all of those things, really help contribute to why this movie isn't doing as good as the first two did. What I don't know, and maybe you can add some color, I have no idea why it's doing so well overseas. I honestly couldn't tell you. I'm sure there's some reason, but I really don't know. That's actually like a surprising thing to hear from me. But yeah, man, those are some of my thoughts.
So, I guess a couple of things here. Yes, we have seen just a trend of these performances for these comic book films just continue to just go downward. That has been the trajectory for a number of months now. Bit of a larger conversation I want to have about this year, coming up as well, just about what we've gotten this year so far. But I think, look, there's a number of things here. Bad word of mouth always, always, always is a huge factor. When people go see a movie and they start to tell their friends, or they start to see ratings and all of that stuff, and it doesn't look good, people will bail, and they might have initially
Mhm.
made plans and they're like, oh, never mind, I'm going to cancel. I'm just not going to do it. So that is a big factor. The third film in a franchise, always a huge obstacle that you have to overcome there. And the marketing for this movie, I think, to your point that you made earlier, did not really give a ton of compelling reasons as to why this was a must-see film. I mean, Carnage was a huge lever that they could pull for that second one that you just don't have here. The first one, as I mentioned, comes out at the height of the popularity for these movies, and so it was almost just kind of a given that it was going to be successful, even though
Mm-hmm.
it didn't seem that way at the time. And this one, it's like, well, what does it have really working for it? Oh, it's the last Venom movie starring Tom Hardy. I don't think people care. I don't think that that is a selling point that
Nope.
people particularly care about that makes them want to go to the movie theater and pay to see it. That's just not going to move the needle. And so, all of those things wrapped up, it just creates this formula and this result that we see here, where it's like the enthusiasm just isn't there, and the overarching narrative that's out there that everybody I think is very much aware of now, especially on social media, is that hey, these movies aren't as good as they used to be. So you don't need to go see them. um, and that doesn't help anybody. That doesn't help any property. Like
Nah.
even if it's a great movie, well, you kind
Mm-hmm.
of have to be great to really overextend and overperform.
Yeah.
And it's only going to be perhaps those big, huge cultural moments like a Deadpool and Wolverine, or Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, like where
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, yeah, we know that this is going to be special. But all the stuff in between, I've said this numerous times, like the days of any comic book film just coming out and just overperforming and making a ton of money, those days are over. Like we have to just get past that. And so, what is your unique selling proposition that's going to get people outside to go see this? Internationally, I think I think that this is in line with films like the MonsterVerse at Warner Brothers, the Godzilla and Kong films, the Meg movies. I think
Mm-hmm.
internationally, films with big creatures and
Mm-hmm.
things that don't necessarily lean on cultural specificity, I think that they just always perform well. Those
Mm-hmm.
huge genre action blockbuster films, they just do well all the time, even internationally. It doesn't even have to be a great movie. I mean, look at Aquaman, the most recent one. That did better internationally than it did domestically. The fact that it made even $400 million after the abysmal ratings for that
Crazy.
film and the
Yeah.
terrible performance domestically, like it only made that much because of its international performance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in large part that's just because they still enjoy those big spectacles that Hollywood put out. When you get big monsters and big CGI battles, I think Venom fits right in line with that category. But I don't think it's going to carry it that far. I think that that only works but so much, and that the word of mouth will continue to spread. And I do anticipate that this is going to have a big drop off from week to week, and it's not going to be pretty. I don't even think that this is going to hit what Venom Let There Be Carnage made. I think it's going to make even less than that. And so we're going to see those diminishing returns from the first to the second to the third movie, which is never a good sign, never what you want to see as a studio, especially considering that this is the last one allegedly for Tom Hardy. A bit of a larger conversation I want to have, though, is just about Sony and these Marvel movies, because this now, I mean, this adds to the whole narrative of what they've been producing from
Mm-hmm.
Morbius and Madam Web and those movies that underperformed dramatically. Like, at what point do we hold these studios accountable, or do the executives themselves hold themselves accountable and say like, hey, we probably can't keep spending all of this money on these movies when they're not making what we expect them to make? Like, I don't know. Is this the death nail or a turning point? Is it Craven? Is Craven like the one movie where it's like, okay, well, if that one truly bombs, then this shit is just over and done with, and we pull the plug? But at a certain point, I do think you have to, look at yourself and say like, hey guys, this just isn't working. We're making Spider-Man spinoff movies, and Spider-Man is not going to be in them because he's already in the MCU, so we're not going to ever have that payoff in any meaningful way. What are we doing here? And if we're not getting people to go see these and pay money for these, then like, what's really the point of any of this? So I don't know what your thoughts are on that subject, just the larger experiment as a whole. But I don't know. It just kind of feels like we're at the end of things as opposed to like an optimistic new beginning for what might come in the future.
Yeah, like you said, there has to be a moment where they look internally and they're like, we can't keep doing this thing anymore. And Sony is so interesting because it feels like they're continuously trying to appeal to they're trying to have a little leg of what these nerdy movies are supposed to be, right? The Uncharted. I know they're talking about Street Fighters, Bloodshot, not good. Like Gran Turismo, like they're trying to have like this very niche. Here's the video game and comic book movie content, but it's not turning out that well. It's not doing very good, and I don't know what is the nail in the coffin. When do is somebody over there, I don't know, holding them accountable for anything? It just feels like every dud that comes out, they're like, let's try that again, and here's another one, and here's another one. Like, I don't know if I like, part of me doesn't even feel like if Craven does bad, it means anything for them. They're gonna be like, well, next week, guys, don't forget we're coming out with Spider-Man Noir and and Cindy Moon out here. You know, I just don't know what the end looks like in the near future. But I know in terms of Spider-Man content specifically, it's time to stop. But yeah, I don't know if it takes fan outpour. Part of me almost feels like Marvel should be like, all right, y'all, we're partnering with y'all. Y'all got to stop. Like, y'all also, y'all not helping our case either of some of this stuff what's going on. Like, we understand it's still Marvel at the end of the day. Like, stop it. I don't know, man. Somebody has to hold somebody accountable at the end of the day, but I just don't know what that looks like.
I mean, there was that conversation we had a few weeks ago in regards to Spider-Man where we learned that pretty much any villain or anti-hero or character that was utilized by Sony in a film could not then be utilized in a Tom Holland-led Spider-Man movie. So we are prohibiting the appearance of certain characters that could potentially be great for Tom Holland. Yeah. And we were racking our brains like, well, who is the villain in Spider-Man 4? It can't be Venom. It can't be Craven. We've already done technically Doc Ock and Green Goblin from Sam Raimi's universe. Are we just going to like do new versions of them? We've already done a version of Scorpion and Vulture. Like we've kind of run through a lot of these guys. And so what is next? And so just holistically, how are we helping our case here if we're trying to like build something that's bigger and grander? And I'll never bet against Spider-Man and being able to make a good Spider-Man movie. I mean, we've seen it time and time again, but at the same time, it's also just like, well, these spin-off movies are just, I mean, the execution of them, even just the ideation of them just don't make sense. Like, we're making movies without the titular character that's attached to them. And he's never going to be. So why are we really doing this? Like, why are we making 3 Venom movies for Tom Hardy to just say, all right, y'all, I got my money. I'm done. I'm gone. Peace. Never going to fight with Spider-Man. Okay, so now we have 3 Venom movies that people kind of like. And, they did make a lot of money to be fair, but all the other ones, Morbius, Madam Web. I mean, what's the likelihood that Craven's going to be good? Like, what are we really doing here if there isn't potential and the opportunity to tie them into the character that birthed them to begin with? I just don't, even from a creative standpoint, just don't really get and understand that. And so I think when you see, or when you take that idea and then you add it on top of what we've seen from the box office, that nothing has worked outside of the first 2 Venom movies, I don't know. I think as a studio, I know that they're trying, and everything is just, you have to grab at whatever IP that you have, because Sony probably has the least to choose from in terms of just available IP that can turn around a lot of money for them. So slim pickings, but we got to do something else at this particular juncture. It's already been a number of years, and so yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of perplexed by it all. I really don't know where to go with it or where they're going to go with it. I do think Craven's gonna tell us a lot, and if that movie just doesn't work, if it's just if it's an abomination, if it just completely crashes and burns, then we're back at square one. We've made no progress from 2018 to now, if you ask me, outside of those 3 Venom movies. And so that'll be a very, very huge, tall challenge for Sony in terms of what comes next. But we'll continue to have that conversation and unpack that.